invest, you are trying to support some targeted groups. And I think maybe the figures were not correct, because the 2 classrooms that were done were 2.1 million, and some of them may have been spaced. But what I'm really saying is that I am a private individual, and what I was doing is to use my froze, because you cannot invest through, you cannot disrobe your assets to invest in pro bono. It's in froze on the basis of request and verified request. So that continues, and as long as they are verifiable requests. For me, I was supporting schools because I do believe that, and especially polytechnics, because I do believe that the youth can find their way. So essentially, I don't have a lot of allocation because one of the things I have to do is to educate my children, and I have been doing that. Obviously, you do that. You actually provide pro bono on the basis of the balances that you have. Then you're right about their advice to the government, and obviously different aspects. Let me put it this way. I would like to encourage the KRA to participate in taxing where there is a boom, the sector that is booming. It should also participate. But those taxes should not distort the market. They should not distort the allocation of resources. They should not create incentives to run away from taxes. And those are the principles that we would want to promote. And once we promote that, I'm sure the tax system is going to work very well. And it's also consistent with Mheshimiwa Mishi in terms of saying the poor are not going to be targeted. We are actually going to make sure that the taxation system should make sure that it does not distort the market, does not create incentive for you to run away, but it should create a very efficient way. For example, I talked about the digital platforms. They are going to help us in terms of correcting taxes in a way that doesn't also distort the market structure and even the demand structure of the products in question. For me, that is very, very important. How do we structure that? We structure that in terms of consultation, in terms of how the market is, how the structure of demand in the market, and also how the economic situation is. For example, you saw that during the COVID, there were quite a lot of consideration from so many organizations, including banks, in terms of lowering the effects of the impact of the tax. Application of 223. This is a difficult concept, but it's essentially the whole issue, and I think I borrow also from Mheshimiwa Junet, who said that the Parliamentary Committee on Finance and even Budget, they all observe, they are watching in terms of what is happening. I think the most important thing is to make sure that the expenditures or the functional expenditures are also consistent with the rate down law, and that is going to be very, very important. And this has happened, and the government is trying to swim, the current government, even in its own transition, is trying to swim through it. But what solutions? Every day, when you have a problem, you generate solutions of what should be done. It is now tightening the whole issue of how much, and the Parliament is actually going to be responsible for this, to try to say how much, what flexibility do you have even within the Article 223. You're not changing the law, but you're changing the guidelines. And I do believe that guidelines work well to shape the current constraints, to shape the market consideration, and also to guide us in terms of where we should be. And I do believe that is fantastic. I do agree with you in terms of wastage, Mheshimiwa Ferdinand. But we have to ask ourselves, how do we achieve the best results? We have to start talking about how do we prioritize the areas that we want to target and invest in, and how do we target those areas in terms of what we have done, and finally, how do we monitor and evaluate the results, because they have to be consistent with the results. So we have to create that awareness in terms of the priorities we want to have, and list the priorities. Some of those priorities can be time-bound, and then we want to see whether we have results. Can we evaluate that? And if the totality of the results was to make sure that the economy grows, it is not only going to improve the welfare, but it's also going to improve the tax collection. And that is why I do believe that is extremely important. Mheshimiwa
Speaker, I'm not satisfied with the answer.
Just seek a clarification.
Yeah, because we're talking about the government massive wastage and huge public, salaries and what have you. So what are you going to do to tame that? That's what has been a blame game out here. So you have told me the scenario as it is.
Thank you,
but
Chair.
What are you going to do if I have to make you the minister for?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I alluded to this earlier, and I said that one of the things is actually to understand where did the rain beat you. The first thing is to make sure that you have stringent measures in terms of containing that. I argued earlier that we need to come up with some concessional funding to actually try to resolve the current constraints. Once you are out of those constraints, then you come down to prioritize which areas, which wastage, for example, what you're really saying, can we cut? And how do we restrict those? How do we create formidable regulations and guidelines in terms of curtailing those wastage? But right now, you have to get out of the problem you are in. I do know that the wage bill is quite high. Then the next thing, what do you need to do with the wage bill? What kind of rationalization measures do you need to do? The promise I am giving you right now is to say that whatever areas that we focus on, we want to make sure that we have sustainable footprint in terms of policy, in terms of actions, in terms of guidelines. That is the only way we can survive to the next decade. If we have sustainable guidelines, sustainable frameworks that can be tested over time. And that is the way I was trying to approach it, so that I don't want to specifically talk about any issue, wage bill on all that, but I'm really saying that we need to come up and prioritize. We need to target. But in all those actions, they have to be sustainable. They have to be seen to be sustainable and time-bound. And that is going to be very, very important. Thank you. Then I was going to Mheshimiwa Mishi and the KRA. I think I've talked about that. The Kenyans, we cannot target when you are in such a dire situation, when poverty is biting and cost of living is rising. That is not the time to increase taxes or retarget taxes. That is the time to look at areas where you can provide interventions. So it means that when I talked about the bottom-up approach, I was talking about those areas that you participate in, those markets. We need to regulate them. Most of the time, the poor and in the markets they participate in, it's not because they don't work hard. They work hard, but the market is captured. That elite capture itself diminishes the economic rent that you should otherwise get. And it's an area that we are going to talk about and try to fix. But the other thing I promised and also talked about, when I talked about the digital space, we have worked so well. We have seen that we can use the retail electronic payments platform to actually pay taxes. When it was started, everybody was very happy about it. It removes that personal interaction between the taxman and the taxpayer. And we have seen, even in one of the papers that I've prepared in the last 2-3 years or so, it showed that some of those taxes that uses the payments platform are actually performing much better. The whole issue is to try and see how do we protect that goose that laid the golden egg. That is the main point, and that is the policy of taxation that I came up with. I talked about, please do not raise tax rates to the point where it becomes an inducement for you to evade taxes. That is, you're killing the goose that laid the golden egg unless you want to say bye-bye to the golden egg. Mheshimiwa Koech, thank you very much about this growing fiscal distress and the debt. Last December, we had a special issue of a journal where we talked about growing with debt. So essentially, it's an area that I'm quite comfortable with. When the HIPIC initiative was started in 1997 by the IMF, the first paper in that book was our paper, and we argued that external debt is a major problem. So we didn't know that domestic debt would also become a major problem. So we are in the same space. We have to look for avenues and solutions to make sure that it works, and that is what we want to make sure that it works. I think Mheshimiwa Bui, the Hasra Fund.
Yes, Mary Emase, Honorable.
Yes, through you, Mr. Speaker, I need to remind the nominee he hasn't addressed my question. I think just to refresh his mind, my question was on the push to enhance contributions for NSSF in view of the prevailing economic situation.
Yeah.
How will it in any way alleviate the situation? What are your thoughts on it? You have not addressed it. Thank you.
Thank you. I was coming to it. Maybe it's the way I wrote my notes.
We'll finish with Mbui, then
Bwana Mbui, let me come to you. And the Hasra Fund is an intervention. The biggest problem with the intervention is that when you make it special that other people cannot join in, it becomes a problem. It is the entry point that we really need to analyze. And especially the targeted market and how you, and this is going to be constructed on the basis that it is targeting specific group of people in different sectors of the economy, and the entry points must be clear and understood. And this is, the biggest problem is that it is not, an intervention should not be for everyone, but how do you actually prevent that everyone joins in, or how do you make sure that it works? It is the guidelines that you're going to prevent. And I'm sure once the Hasra Fund and the whole product is developed, you'll see that, and I'm sure you'll have a chance to interrogate it and see how it is going to be done. Declaration, I think I made a mistake. The last part was lumped with the shares in a bank, lumped with the other investments. So it's a mistake that it was put as a number on its own. But of course, I wouldn't want to say that there was an error. It is just the numbering that was a mistake. I think we go back, Mheshimiwa, sorry that your question was not missed. The whole issue was how do we look at NSSF? How is it going to save you if it's your future retirement benefits? Some of us in our working life, what we have done is to make sure that we match what the employer has given you, we match it. What you are really doing is to safeguard your future. What we need to do is to come back and start talking, that is consultation, and saying, how much would you be prepared to actually save? So essentially, it's not a punishment, you are saving for the future. And that is something that we can actually deal with and say, what is the optimal level of your sacrifice today to help you in future? The whole issue of savings and raising savings in Africa, and especially in Kenya, is a major debate, because you cannot invest if you have no savings. So the whole issue is to come back to you as a worker and ask, how much are you willing to save now? If your employer is giving you this much, can you match it or even pay more than that? You are safeguarding your future. And that is something that is a democratic choice for most people, but it's also important to make sure that we have an awareness, so that there is no targeting. It's not saying that we need this number. What we actually need is savings. How much do you want to save, and what do you want to save for? And that is